What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you here. Sorry for the lighting. I'm recording this at 9:00 at night. I don't have a lot of light in my office, but we are getting it done, and I'm excited to bring this interview to you guys today. Listen, it is really interesting, the sport of wrestling. In the last 5 or 6 years, just last handful of years, girls wrestling has been sanctioned in the state of Idaho, and it continues to grow across the country. But Idaho is relatively new with this. And our guest today has been involved with the evolution and growth of the sport of girls wrestling. So while we will be talking about wrestling in general, we will focus a decent portion of this interview on the girls wrestling side of things. And I want you guys to take note of it. It's very insightful. He's going to be talking about it from the perspective of a coach who's heavily involved on that side of things. Now, we'll also be talking about club wrestling versus high school wrestling, some of his opinions there. But I want you guys to wait towards the end of the interview where we talk about the state championship wrestling landscape and how he believes Idaho could shift some things up in the wrestling world if they wish to be a little bit more credible in the eyes of the college recruiters, so to speak. And it's a really insightful piece and a really insightful segment because I even took note of it while we were talking because I was like, I never thought of it that way. So just wait towards the end of the interview, listen to it, and you'll get to hear it for yourself. Really excited to bring our guest on. His name's Jordan Jimenez, and I'm excited for you guys to listen. So make sure to get the notepads out, take note, because this is the Gametime Guru. So,
what time is it? Game time!
This is the Gametime Guru podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. What's up, everybody? Welcome out to another episode of the Gametime Guru podcast. My name is Shane Larson, host of the show. We're almost 8 years into the podcast right now. We're coming up on 8 years in January. And I want to say thanks to everybody who's tuned in, who's been part of the show, anybody who's left us a review, who's shared the podcast, anyone who's followed me, whether it be on my show or on my social media platforms. Thanks to everybody, every single person at some point who's helped us get to this point. Like, just thank you. It takes a village. I know that. Started almost 8 years ago in my kitchen in Meridian when I was living in a 1,200 square foot home, just me and my dogs at the time. And so, I just appreciate everybody. So thank you so much for tuning in. The show has, at this point, been downloaded in 182 countries in all 50 states. So we appreciate all of you guys for making this worldwide. And I also want to just share with you guys, one of my biggest initiatives in 2024 was to get the YouTube platform going. And so YouTube has never been my strength, but I do have video content out there. We've got about 530 followers on there at the time of this recording. So if you guys want to hit us with the follow button over there, help me grow this. I'd love to get it over 1,000 followers on YouTube as we continue to build out that platform moving forward. So just hit us with a follow. As you guys heard in the introduction, we're bringing on an expert in the wrestling field. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I had on a guy who actually coaches alongside our guest here today. And then, as you guys have heard in the past, I actually had on Russell Brunson, and all of these guys had actually coached in a similar sphere, similar programs. And then I also had a wrestler on a couple months ago who went to my alma mater, Meridian. His name's Hudson Rogers. He's now down at Utah Valley doing his thing down there. Wrestling, I'm super intrigued by the wrestling world. I'm not a wrestler myself, not a former wrestler, but I love the sport and have a massive respect for it. So glad to bring on our guest. His name is Jordan Jimenez. He's a coach. He's a former wrestler himself, and I actually want to dive into his wrestling career a little bit. So, Jordan, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thank you for having me, Shane. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, we've been around all the same guys, Russell Brunson, Todd Hine, and then you mentioned a guy like Hudson Rogers. I've spent a little bit of time around him as well. It's crazy how small wrestling's a big sport. It's big all over the world, but it's one of those things where it's a small world at the same time. It seems like everybody knows everybody in this giant ocean of a sport, which is really cool.
That's what I've seen, to be honest. Like, it just being in the media side of it and just kind of checking it out. I'm like, man, like everybody runs in similar circles, which is pretty cool. Even if you're not in the same programs, you know what I mean? It's just like everybody's gone to tournaments. They know who they are. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Now, Jordan, as we rewind the clock a little bit, as we get into this, I know we want to talk a little bit about the Idaho men's and women's wrestling, and that's actually a really insightful piece here that we got to dive into. I'm actually really excited for that. But I want to get to know you a little bit more as the wrestler. So let's rewind the clock and talk about your experience as a wrestler, where you wrestled at collegiately, and even like growing up what your background was. So if you wouldn't mind unboxing then a little bit of that for us.
Yeah, let's do it. And man, when you say like my background and accolades and different things like that, I wasn't the most decorated wrestler, and not even close, you know. So I didn't start wrestling until my freshman year of high school. Up until then, I had played baseball. I played football in high school as well. And then I had a football coach in high school, my freshman year, who was also the wrestling coach. And if you know anything about football coaches, they always want all their football players to wrestle. There's a lot of different attributes that go along with football that also go along great with wrestling. So you'll never meet a football coach that doesn't want their guys to wrestle. And so he convinced me to come out and wrestle. And I wrestled 4 years. I'm from California, from the Bay Area. And so wrestled 4 years there. And man, when I say I never had the success that I'd wanted to or felt like I deserved, I really mean it. I didn't make it to the state tournament until my senior year of high school. Didn't place the state tournament. I was ranked top 8 going into the tournament, but man, just didn't have the results that I had wanted to. And then from there, so at that point, I was kind of struggling to find a college home to go to. By that point, by my senior year, I kind of made the decision, like, I do want to pursue this and go wrestle at the next level. So I quit playing football my junior year, went 100% in on wrestling. And I had found a college called Colorado State Pueblo, which is in Southern Colorado, Division II. And I had went out there to go and wrestle. And again, it's a repeating thing of just never getting the results that I felt like I had worked for. I wrestled 2.5 years there and then decided to part ways with wrestling. And so at that point, it came down to, I had such a bitter taste in my mouth from the sport. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I thought I would never put on a pair of wrestling shoes again. And then a few years down the line, I'm sitting around, I'm doing jujitsu, Muay Thai, different things like that. I'm like, man, like, I got the itch. You know, there's a lot of things you learn from success, right? But there's also a lot of things you learn when you don't have success, and figuring out, like, there's a lot of guys out there that can talk from a position of, I had all this success, I know exactly what to do, but there's something to be said about, I didn't have the success and here's why. Let me help other people not make those same mistakes. So that's kind of what brought me into the coaching world now.
Wow. No, I'm actually really glad you said that. I want to share something there with people, and hopefully you guys can take note of this. I always encourage people, if you got your phone on you, if that's what you're listening to this on, to get your notepad out so you can listen to Jordan and take notes on his insight here. And something that's very similar with me, Jordan, on that is I actually relate in a lot of ways on the basketball side of things, because I was a late bloomer. I was, didn't make varsity till I was a senior. I had a good senior year. I led the, league in 3-point percentage. I was a good shooter, did my thing, but I never got college looks. Right. And so then I served a church mission, came home after 2 years of that. I came back and kind of got on with my life and never really was able to, I wanted to play, but then I kind of just moved forward. And I've always kind of had that in the back of my mind. I still compete in city leagues and stuff as an old man now, but I never really had the success that I wish I would have had. And I always kind of felt bitter because I was a quote unquote late bloomer when it came to my skill set and my athleticism. Graduated when I was 17. So I didn't really get athletic till I was 18, but I was already a year removed from high school, all sorts of stuff. But I feel like that actually has benefited me later on. If I look, I'm 36 now. And if I look down, I can talk to these kids in high school, and yeah, I don't have all the accolades that some of the trainers around the Valley have as far as their collegiate and professional experience. But I do feel like, because of my perspective, different things that I've learned from not necessarily making it to where I wanted to make it, but still keeping on the grind and still studying the game and still understanding it, I feel like I can give them a completely different perspective. And it's been beneficial. It's actually benefited my coaching career in basketball, because these high school kids have gained a respect for me because of that. Whereas before I was scared to I'm like, man, they're not going to trust me because I don't have the accolades that everybody else does. I actually think there's equal sides, it's equal on both sides, man. So I relate to you in a certain degree. Now, you made it much further than I ever did when it came to collegiate athletics and stuff. So I commend you for that. Now, if you look back at your wrestling career, though, Jordan, I know you mentioned you had a bitter taste in your mouth when it was done. You're kind of frustrated with it, never really excelled. But if you could look back at your actual wrestling career as a wrestler, as an athlete, as a competitor, what would you say was the biggest life lesson that you learned during your competing time frame?
There's the one that every wrestler is going to tell you is grit and work ethic. And if there's one thing about wrestling that I don't think a lot of other sports do or teach as well, is how to be comfortable, uncomfortable. For those of you who don't know, wrestling is a sport that requires you to make weight every single week. And it's starting to become a thing of the past where kids are cutting a whole lot of weight. For me, however, I wrestled 149 in college, and I usually walked around anywhere from about 165 to 170. And so having to make that weight week in, week out for a wrestling season, which usually goes from around November to March, depending on the state, it's tough. And you kind of have to get comfortable with just being a little hungry, being a little thirsty, still going to have to compete your best, and show up to practice every day and train. That would probably be one of the biggest takeaways myself, as well as just about every other person who steps on the mat is going to take away with them. But then there's also the other side of learning to be coachable, which is something I never did. And whether it's wrestling or in life, learning how to take criticism, make adjustments, and just not make the same mistake more than once. That's something now looking back, I take to my work, to coaching now, which is something I didn't do when I competed. I was not the most coachable guy. I worked really hard, was never late, showed up on time, worked as hard as I could in practice. But I wasn't the most coachable athlete in the world. And so now looking back, it's like, okay, like if you want to excel at anything, you have to be coachable, no matter how successful you are.
Such a good point. I hope people take note of that too. I mean, and you live and you learn, right? Like you look back and you're like, man, I wish I could have done X, Y, and Z better. But that's part of the beauty of it. You look back at the playing days or the competing days, and you realize what you could have done. But I want to say something about you guys' ability to cut weight. So when I boxed for 3 years for Golden Gloves back when I was in high school, and then my freshman year of college at Boise State. And so when we were competing, I never really had to cut weight. I was a smaller light heavyweight. Like I fought at the very bottom level of the amateur weight class. So everybody was much bigger than me in our weight class, because in boxing in the amateurs, it was a weight range. So I was 185. As long as they were within 16 pounds of my weight, they could fight me. So that's how it was in boxing, which made a big difference. The thing was, though, I've always like commended the dudes who were wrestling and had to cut weight. I just like what you were saying, like being comfortable, being hungry, just getting used to it. That's one thing. One thing, like, okay, let me just fast for a day, intermittent fasting. But try doing that almost every day, or just being in a caloric deficit pretty much every day, and then competing in wrestling, like going to trainings. The amount of work you guys put in practices, even at the high school level, is absolutely ridiculous. I used to be in basketball practices, like on the bottom court, and the wrestling team would be running laps and stair laps upstairs. I remember watching them crying, like these kids that are like big kids that are out there doing their thing. They were crying because they were just past their mental and physical limits, ralphing in the freaking garbage cans and just continuing on. It's like bar fall up in the garbage can. You're just going to keep going. And I'm like, dude, so that's how mentally and physically exhausted they were. And they're doing that probably without eating a ton of food. I mean, you just got to get used to coming in, putting in the work. And it's different than football, right? Football's like, eat as much as you can, come and lift heavy weights, and let's just go to work, But it's like, well, you're going to do all the other stuff except for eat as much as you want. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, there's always the stigma of like wrestlers and basketball players don't like each other. It's generally during the same time of the year, so there's always like conflict there. But it's really because you guys get to eat and we don't.
Yeah, it's pretty much what it is.
Respect the athleticism. It's like, man, you guys get to eat and I don't, and we go have to work out and everything, and I'm sitting here hungry. What the heck?
No, dude, it makes sense now. As I'm older, though, Jordan's funny. He's like, as we're older and we're trying to lose weight now, I'm in my mid 30s. Like, it's like I'm like starving if I'm trying to lose weight, and I'm like, oh, that's what they felt like. That's why they were hangry all the time. So it makes sense. So Jordan, what got you into the coaching side of things? Like, and how long have you been coaching for? Like, what was the transition like going from, competing and then being, having a little transition period of not getting into it and then getting into the coaching side of it? What was the transition like, and how long have you been doing it for?
So when I stopped wrestling, I hadn't stepped on a mat to wrestle with wrestling shoes in probably, I think it was about 3 years. And then I moved here to Boise, and it got to the point where I was like, man, like, I miss the sport. I'm not going to go try and compete again or anything like that, but I miss the sport. And so I sent a DM to like 4 different high schools. They all got back to me, but one of them got back to me the quickest. And so I was like, all right, that's the school I'm going to. Showed up there, ran a practice, and the coach that was there was like, I'm all in. You're hired. You're going to be on our coaching staff this year. But now, and so when I first got into it, it was almost a selfish reason. Like I wanted to get on the mats. I wanted to train. I wanted to be around the sport. And so it was more for myself. But now I don't even wrestle anymore, really. I've got a neck injury, so I don't do a whole lot of like live wrestling or anything anymore. Now it's like, I truly want to help these kids not make the same mistakes that I did, and help them be better people. And so that's kind of what keeps me around. At first it was a selfish reason. Now it's I like to think that it's a very selfless reason.
Heck yeah, man. And as a coach, I'm curious because coaching basketball myself, it's a little different than playing, for a variety of reasons. And I like to ask the coaches this on the show is like, what do you think is the biggest difference or the biggest challenge, so to speak, Jordan, from coaching as compared to actually wrestling and competing?
For me, and this was what I had to learn because I've been coaching now. This will be my 4th season. And so when I say a young coach, I mean 3 years ago, after my first season. Biggest thing I've had to make an adjustment on is understanding that not everybody takes information the same way I do. Not everything I did is going to be applicable to everybody else. And so really having to kind of like step back and like figure out each individual kid instead of not approaching it how I would want something to be approached. Because every kid that you work with has a different background, has a different life, has a different story, and you can't have a blanket approach to coaching. It needs to be very individualized per athlete. And so that's probably the biggest like adjustment I've had to make now that I've been around for a little bit.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. Now, you can't have a one size fits all type of thing. I think it's important to share your experiences. I think it relates to a lot of people, but understanding like, okay, how do I adjust to make sure it gets through this kid? But the cool thing about that too, Jordan, is like that's applicable to anything in life, in a leadership role at work, in the home, if you have a family, a spouse, or whatever. Like being able to adjust your communication styles, but still get the point across is like a super impactful like skill set. So it's kind of cool to see how wrestling can actually hit the parallels between that and real life, and it's pretty dope. So, when I was in high school, it's been 18 years, which is crazy to me. That's been that long. I can't even believe that, to be honest. But like wrestling was a male dominant sport. Okay. Especially in the high school level. Relatively new to the game is like the female side of things, at least in Idaho, right? Now, like we've got full on girls wrestling, like sectors essentially is what it is. I don't even know. You call them divisions. But back in the day, I remember it was like, if a girl wanted to wrestle, they could, but it would be in the male divisions. And like, there was like one, like there was barely like any female wrestlers. And now it seems to be more, I guess, just more common. And I wanted to kind of touch base on that. That's a big part of this interview, is allowing you to share some insight on that. So let's dive into the girls wrestling side of things, the evolution of that, so to speak, in the sport. So what are your takes on that to start with?
Man, it's been a huge blessing for me to be a part of that world. And kind of, I don't want to give myself too much credit here, but be somebody that can help that sport grow here in Idaho. Man, I think in Idaho, wrestling has only been sanctioned for girls for about 5 years now. So it's relatively new here. And not just in Idaho, but across the nation, women's wrestling is the fastest growing sport in the country. So it's great to see that. And man, I'm a little bit embarrassed or ashamed to say this, but I didn't like girls wrestling when I was coming up. Didn't like it. But even as a young coach, I was just like, like almost thinking of it as like second class, right? But now that I've spent the past couple of years around these ladies here in Idaho, especially, I could not express the amount of respect I have for the female wrestlers in Idaho and across the whole country. They are every bit as tough, every bit as hardworking, every bit, I would say, more coachable in a lot of scenarios. And they deserve every bit of attention that they're going to get the next few years in Idaho.
That's awesome to hear. It's really cool. I think it's one of those topics not many people really want to talk about because they're just not sure how to approach it. So I'm actually really glad we're chatting about this right now, because I think a lot of people, if we're being 100% real, probably felt the same way as what you just expressed there, like back in the day. And even like as a coach, when you first started, like it's one of those, man, the girls are wrestling. And we don't mean that in a negative way. It's just kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And so it is cool to see the evolution of the sport. I am interested to dive a little more into this. You mentioned they're coachable. It seems to be like they're very coachable. In regards to, I think this is just from feedback I used to get from athletes. And then when I was going to interview you, I started thinking back on some of the conversations I had with my friends who were wrestlers back then. And, some of it was just they're uncomfortable because they felt like they're just much more stronger than the females. So like if they had to wrestle them, it was just uncomfortable. Obviously, there's just certain positions that are just weird for guys and girls. It just seemed a little different. But part of it was just they would say, hey, we're just naturally stronger than them. They're not as tough. They're not as mentally or physically strong. So I actually want to talk about that. Let's talk about their mental and physical strength from your perspective as a coach, how the female wrestlers adapt to that side of it, because wrestling is a grinding sport. It is mentally and physically taxing. It will break people. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel like the girls have done since you've been coaching?
Like I said, I couldn't have more respect for the ladies here in Idaho wrestling. And again, like you think women's wrestling and you're like, they're soft, they're whatever. But I've been around some females in the past year here, especially going out to the National Wrestling Tournament out in North Dakota. I have several female wrestlers on my team here in Meridian, and you can't discount their mental toughness at all, right? They are every bit as tough, if not tougher in a lot of cases, than boys can be. Obviously, when it comes to physical capability, there's biological differences. By the time they both hit puberty, boys are going to be stronger. It just is what it is, right? But now that they're on the same playing field and women's wrestling is sanctioned here in Idaho, it's not really a concern with having to go and wrestle boys or do anything like that, which you have girls like Sierra Foster or Alyssa Randalls who are really pioneers in Idaho women's wrestling, who actually placed at the boys' state tournaments. So for anybody who says that girls can't compete and aren't as tough or aren't as hardworking, you're absolutely wrong. So it's hard to quantify it, but from what I've seen, man, they are amazing. So it's awesome.
That's super cool. Now you got to talk to me like I'm 5, right? So let's just assume like I know nothing, right? Let's chat about weight classes. What are the weight classes that they have, I guess, in Idaho's girls wrestling divisions?
So I believe it goes from 100, 110, 114, 120, 126, 132, and then usually jumps around every 8 to 10 pounds after that.
And is that pretty standard across the board for men too?
Yeah. So men's wrestling in Idaho starts at 98 pounds. 98 pounds, 106, 113. 120, 126, 132, and so on. So they're slightly different, but generally you're going to see a weight class every 8 to 10 pounds until you get up to about 195. And then it goes from 220 to 285. Whereas girls don't have a 285 pound weight class. I forget what the top end is for girls. I think it's around 200 pounds, but yeah.
Okay. So it follows pretty much the same route through the weight classes. Weight cutting. Now I know you mentioned that earlier. It's shifted now as compared to even when you were in high school, a little bit more like regulations as far as like hydration clauses and so forth. If you wouldn't mind, I guess for both the boys and the girls, can you talk about how weight cutting, I guess, is regulated now as compared to back in the day? Because I do remember, dude, like even Russell Brunson, he'll tell you, he told me on the podcast a couple of years back on here, his weight cutting experiences. I mean, he was dropping 20, 30 pounds in a week. Like he would do that consistently. But now it seems that they have the regulations on that. So how does the weight cutting work these days for wrestling?
Yeah. So there's a couple different layers to that. And the first one is going to be the one that the state regulates, right? Or the whatever overseeing body of that of wrestling is, right, for that state. So for here in Idaho, and it was the same when I was in California, they take a hydration test at the beginning of the year where they measure their height, their weight, and then their body fat. So they know what percentage body fat they're at. But then also what they have to do at that same time is they have to do a hydration test. So they pee in a cup. They have a trainer or doctor or whatever look at it and say, okay, you're hydrated at this time. This is going to be your weight descent plan. So they'll take a look at your percentage body fat and then they will give you a specific amount of weight that you are allowed to lose each week. So if you're wrestling at 132 right now, that is the weight that you're allowed to be at. If you want to compete at 126, but you're only allowed to lose 1 pound a week of body fat, that means it's going to take 132 to 126. That's 6 pounds. That means it'll take 6 weeks until you are legally allowed to compete at that weight class. So that's one thing that they do to try and stop, massive amount of weight cutting. But I think the bigger side of that isn't going to come from a regulatory body of like, because there's always going to be ways to cheat, right? There's always going to be ways to figure out how to kind of cheat the system and game the system. What it really comes down to is coaches having conversations with their athletes and figuring out a realistic weight class that is right for you, that is manageable for you, and putting you in a position where, okay, you may cut a couple pounds, but you're not depleting yourself. You're not killing yourself. You're not going and competing like super malnourished and tired and dead. Because while if you're wrestling 132 right now, and just because your weight descent plan says you can go and compete at 120 pounds, does not mean that that is the best weight class for you. Everybody's body's a little bit different. So, hey, it may be better for kids just to stay and wrestle where they're at right now, be happy, train better, compete better. So really, I think the bigger side of it is the coaching side of discouraging massive weight cuts and letting kids know, like, hey, you don't have to go and cut a crazy amount of weight. You don't have to deplete yourself. You don't have to do all this in order to compete at the highest level possible. So now, like with our club and our high school, I mean, we really don't encourage a whole lot of weight cutting. Like going and cutting 3 or 4 pounds, that's not a big deal. That's not significant at all. So that's like I try and have kids cut, 5 pounds, right? Stay within 5 pounds of where you want to compete, diet and live a good lifestyle as far as nutrition goes, see where your body ends up. Hey, let's try and find a weight class within 5 pounds and we can cut that safely and still compete at an optimal level.
Very interesting, man. I wonder if there's, maybe you can, I don't know, you probably can't mention names. You said your guys' high school is pretty good about it. I wonder if some of the coaches these days struggle with that, as like the, we call them the old heads, like the guys who are just like old school mentality. I wonder if they are. I don't know. Do you happen to see that? You don't have to mention names, but do you see that being a struggle for some of them, being like, well, I did it, so it's not that big of a deal. You're not going to die if you just cut weight. They say stuff like that all the time, the old school stuff. Or do you feel like most coaches are adapting pretty well to the new style of weight cutting?
It's 50-50. There's a lot of guys out there that are still in that old school mentality. And in reality, the old school mentality does not beat the new school mentality in almost any way when it comes to the sport of wrestling. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of coaches out there that still encourage big, massive weight cuts. And even if the coaches aren't encouraging it necessarily, they're not stopping it. At the end of the day, we have to remember these are kids. They're going to do dumb things. They're going to think that going and cutting 20 pounds is a good idea. And they don't have a solid coach in their ear saying, hey man, like we got to reevaluate this. This isn't the safest thing. This isn't the best thing for our long-term development. And that's probably one of the bigger issues with it, especially at the younger ages, middle school, early high school. You have kids, whether it's a dad, a coach, or another teammate encouraging these big weight cuts for young kids. You're like, man, like doing that isn't fun. And if you want to go far in the sport of wrestling, if you want to be successful, you have to love the sport. And I can't tell you how many kids I've seen truly fall out of love with wrestling because of the weight cutting portion. And so that's in my opinion the way everybody needs to go. That's the route we need to take, and that's what, in my opinion, is going to be more conducive to long-term development and success.
Man, I really wish, Jordan, that like even like organizations in the professional combat sports world, like the UFC, for example, I mean, that's a big thing too. I mean, you look at other combat sports leagues, fighting championships, they actually have hydration clauses. So it's a little different situation. But the UFC, I mean, you got dudes cutting 30, 40 pounds to make weight, and then they just balloon up like 24 hours later and they're fighting at like 30 pounds. So I think the kids, they see that obviously during but it's they're getting mixed signals here from different things. They're like, well, the professionals at this type of sport can do it. And those are like, and they see that kind of thing. And then they're trying to get told this, that, and the third. And I think it's confusing. I wish it was just congruent across the board. If we're just going to stop the weight cuts, the massive weight cuts, it needs to be regulated. It needs to be stopped across the board from all sports. That is, even the professional level of stuff. I know it's not necessarily apples to apples because the UFC is a little bit more, it's the mixed martial arts world instead of just wrestling, but same concept, same as boxing too. You know what I mean?
And a key distinction is going to be, you look at the massive weight cuts these UFC fighters do. You have to remember they're weighing in 24 hours before they compete. So they're weighing in the day before. With wrestling, if it's a tournament, you're weighing in 2 hours before you go out and compete. If it's a dual meet, which is just between you and one other school, you're weighing in an hour before you compete. So there's a big difference between having 24 hours to weigh in and rehydrate and refuel versus 1 to 2 hours. It's almost impossible to properly rehydrate and refuel in 1 to 2 hours. There's just no way.
That's a great point to make. Great point. That is a great point. So that's going to go into my next question too, though. You're just talking about weight cutting, and that's men, women, with all of that. But I also want to talk about, like, for the girls' side of things, let's dive a little deeper into that too. One of the questions I asked one of my friends who's now a high school girls basketball coach, a varsity coach, I was just being honest with him. I'm like, was there a difference in coaching philosophy when you're coaching girls basketball as compared to guys basketball? There's a different flow to the game, different skill sets and athleticism. So is the coaching philosophy different? And his answer was kind of interesting. He's like, no, dude, at the end of the day, like, sure, men are naturally more athletic. That's just what's going to happen. So it's a bigger, faster, stronger speed of the game. But the X's and O's and the strategy is actually very similar. He's like, whether they execute it at the same level, it's not necessarily always the case, but the strategy is pretty much the exact same, because he said basketball is basketball, and the plays are ran the same way. You're running the same sets and so forth. So I will piggyback off of that one, domino into this question for you, Jordan, in the world of wrestling. Now that, you're in the girls wrestling field, and Idaho is growing here and the sport is growing itself, do you feel from a coaching perspective you have to coach the girls differently than the guys when it comes to technique and strategy and so forth?
No. When it comes to technique and strategy, I don't think there's any difference. Just like you said, basketball is basketball, wrestling is wrestling. And so from that perspective, I don't take a different approach. Where I do slightly alter my coaching is how you talk to them, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually mean that in a good way. I've found that when coaching girls, you don't have to yell at them. You don't have to, get loud and anything like that. You have to just tell them. And when I said earlier, they're a lot more coachable. They just take coaching a lot better, in my opinion and in my experience. Now, again, every girl is going to be different. Every boy is going to be different. There's some boys and there's some girls I can get loud with, and I can kind of be over the top sometimes, but that's what they need. But then there's some boys and some girls that I can talk to them in a very calm voice and get my point across. And so it's not really a boys versus girls thing. It's just an athlete to athlete thing. But again, I've found in my experience, women tend to be a lot more coachable.
You know what? That's a great point. Because when you said that earlier, I'm like, I wanted to know kind of how they're more coachable, and that answered that. Like, it's a very good point. And I've experienced that too. And I think a lot of us probably can, when coaching little kids football, dude, like, and I had girls on the team. It's interesting you said that. When you said that, I thought exactly of the moment where I was like, hey, just do this. Next one, you run this way. Right. And it was just like, yep. Okay. And there was like, no, well, you told me to do this. It was never that. I was just like, okay. And then she did it. And so and it's funny you said that, because I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, she just did what I asked her to do.
Yeah.
Like, so what a crazy concept, right? Just do what I ask you to do,
Yeah.
But it doesn't always come easy for everybody. So that's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no. Yeah. Man, I can't tell you how many times, like, sometimes to get a boy to do something, I don't know if it's ego or what it is, but I find you have to tell them a lot more times to get the same result as when you're coaching a coachable girl. Tell them once and they're going to go and do it. And you're like, oh, that was the easiest thing in the world. Like, why can't everybody be like that? But I mean, again, like, every kid's different. You're going to have girls that are the same way. You got to tell them 10 times and to get them to do it. But as a blanket statement, I would say they definitely take coaching a lot better.
That's so cool. You tend to find, and this is just like just an opinion question, I guess, but like in a lot of sports, I've seen it with wrestling, basketball, football, whatever, baseball. some of the guys would just like play the sport because that's what mom and dad wanted them to do. So they're kind of into it. It sounds like though, like this is a sport, like the girls wrestling being relatively newer to being sanctioned in Idaho. To me, it would just seem like from the outside that these girls are probably there because they want to be there. They're not being forced to be there because there's not like a lot of history with it where mom and dad wanted me to be a wrestler because it really wasn't a thing for a long time. So I don't know, maybe that's kind of my thoughts. Do you feel like you see that a little bit? Like the girls are the ones who want to, the ones who are there want to be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that. Again, that you get a lot of dads that push their sons into wrestling, who maybe don't really want to be there, but they're doing it because their dad wants them to. Whereas with girls, yeah, they've had to overcome a lot of adversity just to be able to be allowed to compete in wrestling. So I've found that a lot of them they're a lot more grateful for the opportunity to be able to compete, because up until not too long ago, they weren't able to. They didn't have their own division. They weren't able to go and compete at the national tournament in their own division, have their own days of the tournament, which is really cool to see. I talk a lot about gratitude, and it's a big aspect of my coaching, but it's cool to see how grateful they are to have those opportunities now. So yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well.
I love that, man. I love it. From the time you were in high school to the time now, I want to talk about pressures, external pressures for younger kids and how that like plays a role into their athletic performance. The reason I bring this question up, Jordan, is just like, I know I'm a bit older than you, so it's almost like a whole new world as far as like high school back then compared to high school now, but I'm around a lot of high school athletes now. I coach basketball, club basketball. So we travel, and a lot of the kids are seniors in high school. And so had kids from Rocky, Meridian, Mountain View, all over the place. And I mean, social media pressures are like extreme. And I noticed that it does take an impact. Obviously they have home pressures, whatever's going on at home that can leak into it. And they use basketball as an escape, so to speak, sometimes when I'm coaching. Now, from your experience in high school compared to now, what would you say was some of the more like, I guess the biggest changes in external pressures that these kids are facing? And do you feel like it's more now, or is it the same as it was when you were in high school?
It's a good question. I think a lot of the pressures are still the same. Obviously, I'm not too far out of high school. I like to tell myself at least. But I graduated in 2015, so all the same social media stuff, all that same stuff is kind of still relevant here today. So I personally don't see a huge difference. Trying to think of what a difference would be. I would say maybe less like social media and stuff like that, but more like social circles, like the people that you're around. I think that may be a different level of pressure that they may be experiencing. Is their friends and their relationships, their families, and different things like that. And maybe now that stuff may have still been around when I was younger. I never had to go through anything like that. But now that I'm on the coaching side, I see it a lot more of the different struggles that kids are dealing with. So maybe that's why it sticks out to me a little bit more now. But as far as like for me, I don't see a giant difference.
No, that makes sense. Hey, dude, it'll get there though. One day you're going to be like, dude, I am far removed from high school. Like when you're on a podcast and you go, dude, it's been 18 years since I graduated. And you're going to be like, holy crap, dude, what happened? Because you don't feel like you're that old, but then you're like, yeah, I'm old. It'll happen. Not right now, but it'll happen. Give it another 9 years or so. So Jordan, one of the questions that I had in my mind, I was just thinking through stuff, and I see a difference in a lot of kids. Like when I was in those days, and I've talked to Russell before too, a common thing that we did as athletes is we studied the game of whatever sport we were playing. Like I was always watching football, always watching basketball, always watching boxing matches. Like I was always watching them on TV. Like that's all that I did. Like I didn't play a ton of video games unless it was Madden. I was just always studying the game. I would always watch it. I was just engulfed in like the sports world. Russell mentioned that once when he was talking about how he and his dad would watch films of his like wrestling matches and so forth. I feel in some sports, just because today's era has changed, they have social media and whatnot, a lot of different distractions. They don't watch the games as much. So like, I'm like, dude, you guys even watch basketball? Like I can't even talk about the NBA or college players with some of my kids I coach. And these are like star athletes. And I'm like, you don't even know who I'm talking about. What is going on, dude? You don't watch the game. Do you feel like that has changed in the wrestling landscape as far as like studying and watching film or anything? Or is that just kind of, is that still at the same point?
I think with wrestling, I think with wrestling, watching it is huge for a lot of these kids now, especially with how easy it is to access. Up until not too long ago, it was hard to go and find wrestling matches to watch. Not everything was on YouTube or Flow Wrestling or even on TV like we're seeing it now. So I do think now with the fact that it is so readily available, whereas not too long ago it wasn't, I think a lot of kids do spend a pretty significant amount of time watching it. I will say every now and then, I'm a nerd when it comes to wrestling. I'm sure you are when it comes to basketball. I'll find a match that I think is interesting and I'll send it to a kid and they're like, who is this? And I'm like, you don't know who Zarbek Sidikov is? You don't know who Hassan Yazdi? Like, are you kidding me? But I do see a lot of kids now like really taking the time to study wrestling, which is cool.
That's so cool, dude. It's crazy. I feel like I know more like wrestling. Maybe it's just because of my show and I've made a network, but I'm like, Matt Brown who went to Penn State, and I'm like Sanderson over there is coaching at Penn State. I'm like, dude, I know like these are people that like are just, I guess maybe not everybody knows them, but I'm like, dude, these are pretty big names in the sport. But yeah, that's cool, dude.
Yeah, and it's become more mainstream. We're still not where we need to be yet, but it is becoming a lot more mainstream. So I think as it grows and becomes more mainstream, you're just going to see more and more and more people who aren't really involved with the sport of wrestling knowing who these names are. For example, like America, not a ton of people who don't wrestle watch wrestling, whereas in countries like Iran, wrestling is our national sport. So even if you've never wrestled before, step foot on a mat, who guys like Jimenez are or Hassan Yazdi. Those guys are like celebrities over there. And you hear guys like Jordan Burroughs, who's a multiple-time Olympic and a world champion from America. He's like, dude, I go to Iran, I'm like a flipping celebrity. Like I get out of the car and everybody's wanting to take a picture of me, where he's like, in America, I get recognized maybe once a month. but over there, they're celebrities.
That is a good point, man. It's crazy. It's sort of how it was in Brazil with soccer. Like you didn't have to like play soccer, but you knew who people were. Like that's just what it was. That's crazy. So Jordan, as you look at your like your coaching world and the way that you are as a coach, talk to me about some of your philosophy, some of your strategies, and the things that you're trying to implement for these kids now as a coach. You said 4 years now you've been coaching, right? So like, what are some of the things you've learned that you're implementing into your specific coaching world?
Yeah. And so the biggest quote I would say that sticks out to me that I was told a few years ago and has really resonated with me ever since and kind of guided the way I approach my relationship with my athletes and the way I coach is nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Whereas you could be the best coach in the world, or you could be the best coach in the world. You could have all the accolades in the world. But until the people that you are leading and coaching know that you truly care about them as an individual in the sport of wrestling, but as people as well, it doesn't matter how much you know. You can't be hard on somebody if they don't know that you care about them. So the approach that I take is I need to make sure that every kid that I coach and work with knows that I care about them, not just as athletes, but as people as well. And once you establish that relationship and build that trust, that's when you're really able to make jumps in their technical ability, physical ability. So in my opinion, that has to come first. And that's probably one of the biggest like guiding philosophies that I try and carry with myself as a coach.
Do you mind explaining like how one might go about doing that? Like how can you actually show that you care about them outside of the sport of wrestling? Like what's something that you do specifically? Is it taking them to the side and chatting with them about their life, their schoolwork, their relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend, etc.? Like what's something that you do specifically on that, Jordan?
It's the conversations that aren't just about wrestling, right? Like before and after practice, are you showing up and talking to them, asking them how school's going, asking them about their family life, everything going okay at home, like, and really just getting to know them and who they are as people, and not just as wrestlers. It's hard to explain like what exactly I do, but it's that process of figuring out like, who is this person when they're not here? Like every kid on my team, for the most part, I know what their home situation's like. I know what their thoughts and their fears are and different things like that. And so when that allows me to tailor the approach that I have with that person in the proper way, right? Because some kids have super tough home lives, right? They don't need to be yelled at more when they come here to wrestling. right? They need somebody who just shows them love and support, and that's what they're going to gravitate to. And then on the flip side, you've got kids that have great home lives and never had a struggle before. Those kids might need a little bit more tougher coaching because they never get it. You know what I mean? And so it's figuring out that balance and figuring out who needs what is huge.
I love that. I think that's super cool. And if I look back on my own life as an athlete, like looking at some of the coaches, the ones who made the biggest impact are the ones who typically showed that they cared about stuff. And they still will reach out to me to this day. Hey, how's the podcast going, man? I see that you're killing it over here. And like, that's cool to me because I've tried to take that into my own coaching world too. Like similar to what you're doing. Like I want to be able to know these kids because those are the ones who made the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back on it, Jordan, in your wrestling career, who was a coach that made an impact in your life?
So it's a coach, and unfortunately he passed away about 3 to 4 years ago. His name was Mark Halverson. He wasn't my full-time high school coach. He was a club coach, and he is a very well-regarded coach here in America on the Greco-Roman side. He's coached the Olympic team. He's coached the world teams. And that was a coach that, man, like you'd be, as well as a coach named Greg Chappell. And both of those coaches were coaches that ask you how you're doing, ask you how's school going, like, and ask you those questions where it's not just always having to hear about wrestling. In fact, when I was back in Fargo, North Dakota for the national championships, I ran into one of those coaches. His name is Greg Chappell. And it's, hey man, like, what are you up to? Like giving me a hug, like acting like we're buddies and friends. And like that relationship has been built through wrestling. But and then same thing with Coach Mark Halverson, who I said unfortunately passed away. When I left and went to college, because I went to college in Colorado, about 45 minutes south of the Olympic Training Center. And again, he's coached the world and Olympic teams, and he would text me all the time, hey man, do you need me to hit up some coaches up there so you can go up there and train up there? Like how's college going and different things like that. And those are the coaches that really stuck out to me. And really, in all reality, molded the way that I try and approach being as a coach. I want to be the coach that in 20 years from now, these kids are calling me to invite me to their wedding, or I'm calling them meeting their kids. You know what I mean? Like that's a relationship I want to build as a coach.
I respect that a ton. Or they're on a podcast talking and they name drop Jordan Jimenez.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, I love that, bro. That's super, super cool. You mentioned something, and I actually I took note of it as you were talking, club wrestling versus high school wrestling. That's something I didn't actually get to chat with you about, but I do want to get your opinion on it before we wrap up, because, it seems like in today's world, club sports are just as important as the high school scene. And sometimes it's more important. It depends on what sport you're competing in. But basketball, I would argue that at least in Idaho and some other states around here, club basketball is more important for the development and for the exposure and for just overall competitive nature than high school sports. High school sports are based on your geographic location of where you live most of the time. Things have changed on that landscape a little bit too. But club sports are where you go and you compete against some of the top level talent. And that's just where you get recruited from. If you want to play next level, it's typically just what happens, and I'm not sure how that works for the wrestling side, but I want to know from your perspective, whether it was, from wrestling or coaching at the club side, what have you found is typically the most important, or do you feel like there's benefits to both? Do you prefer one over the other? Just club versus high school. What's your thoughts?
So if you want to be successful as a wrestler, you have to wrestle year round. And the only way to do that is in a club program. The biggest difference, and this is coming from a distinction of, you have a high school coach that you only see during the season, and then you have a club coach that's separate. There are some high schools that have their own club, so you're with that coach all year round. So that's a little bit different. But when you have a high school situation where your coach is a November to February coach, there's only so much development that you can make in that small window that you're going to have. And usually that whole window is focused on peaking for the state tournament, right? Whereas in a club setting, you're with that same coach all year round. You're not focused on peaking, you're focused on getting better. And there is a big difference there. But also as well, when you're not necessarily focused on the state tournament at the end of the season, there's a little bit less pressure. when you do go to those clubs, and they're a lot more fun. They're a lot more laid back, and you're focused not on just going out and having to compete that weekend, because in high school wrestling you're competing every weekend usually. In the club season you may go a month or two without competing, so you're spending that entire time not focused on the next match, focused on getting better that day. And so that's what I think is a huge distinction. Also, in my experience, a lot of the times high school coaches, depending on your location, obviously, may not be the best coaches. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with that. We've got great coaches at the high school that I'm at. But there are high school rooms where it's like, hey, the head coach isn't a great wrestler. He just happens to teach at the school, and he wrestled a little bit, and now he's the coach. Whereas usually a guy who goes out and takes the time to create a club program is somebody who's been there, done that, competed at a high level, and has a very big vested interest in the development of those athletes long term. And so that's where I kind of see the distinction. But yeah, and same thing when you said getting exposure and getting recruited. There's a lot of off-season summer tournaments like the U.S. Open or the national championships in Fargo, North Dakota, or like Super 32s or Freak Show. Those are all very big nationally recognized tournaments that all of the Division I coaches and scouts are going to 100%. They're all there. They're all looking at those tournaments. And then one other thing here, when you live in a state like Idaho is not known for being the toughest wrestling state in the country. Whereas you have a state like California, Pennsylvania, New Jersey that are powerhouses for the sport of wrestling. So if you're only competing during the high school season, there are recruiters and colleges that aren't necessarily looking at your state in specific. So you almost have to travel in order to get the exposure at these bigger national tournaments. Whereas if you go and win a state tournament in Alabama, no disrespect on Alabama, but you win a state tournament in Alabama versus you win a state tournament in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or California, two totally different things. So those are some of the distinctions that I see.
I appreciate you breaking that down, because I think it's insightful. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of the athletes and parents need to be cognizant of as well if they want to take things seriously. But like, it's just the reality of it, right? It's like, yeah, that last point alone, I think can be spoken for multiple sports. But like, hey, it's not apples to apples. The state championship here does not equal the same over here, especially in the college coach's eyes. That's just the reality. I mean, we don't want to be disrespected as like athletes in Idaho, but that's just the reality, dude. Like, there's just a different level to the game, and that's what happens.
It's a smaller state, and I would say the higher level of wrestlers in Idaho can compete with anybody, right? We do have a ton of tough wrestlers, so I don't want that to sound like we're not. But a big distinction is, compared to California, the entire state of Idaho has less people than the county I grew up in California. But at the same time, we now have 6 divisions in Idaho, so 6 classes. So 132 pounds, there are 6 state champions because there's 6 different divisions. So in my opinion, and some people agree with this, some people don't, if we want to bring Idaho to a higher echelon of wrestling, we need to get rid of 6 divisions. I would love to see 1, but even seeing 2 or 3 where we can congregate the higher level wrestlers in the same weight class at the same state tournament, wrestling for the same thing, that competition creates higher level of wrestlers. Whereas in Idaho, like, you see a guy, and I'll mention these guys because they're great wrestlers, but Carson Exford, who I've spent time coaching over at All In Wrestling Club that I coach at now. And then you have a guy named Coulter Burton. They're both state champs and both easily the best kids in the state at those weight classes. But because they were in different divisions, unfortunately, they didn't get to wrestle each other for the state championship. Me personally, I want to see Carson Exford and Coulter Burton wrestle for the state championship because those are the best 2 guys in the state at that weight class, but we didn't get to see it at the state tournament.
That right there has never really been brought up to my attention or anything like, and that's a phenomenal point. I'm sure that's been discussed. I'm sure you guys in the wrestling world have talked about that, but no one really actually, that we all just assume, oh, it's 6 divisions. And we look at all the other team sports. We look at all the individual sports. What a great point with weight classes. Cause it doesn't matter what, like, you're the same weight in every one of those classes. So why not
Yeah.
Why not
leave
like
that one?
you aggregate them all into like smaller divisions, if not one, a couple, like 2 or 3 instead of 6.
And
That's a great point, man.
and you know, people will point to other states like New Jersey and PA where they have different divisions as well. But the difference is they have a higher population density. They have a lot more people than in Idaho. Or like in California, there's only one state champion per weight class, and they have 10 times, probably more, 10 times the amount of people that we do in Idaho. So when you go and you win a state championship in a state like that, to me, it carries a lot more weight because the competition's higher and there's only one state champion. So for me, that means a lot more. And I'm not saying a Idaho state champion doesn't mean anything, because it absolutely does. But in my opinion, if we want to see the level go up and the respect that we get here in Idaho go up, that's what needs to happen.
Man, I actually have never thought of it that way. I think it would be phenomenal. Get a couple, like get all 6 state champions that win it, and then like put them in their own little tournament.
Yeah.
And that would be a phenomenal way of doing it.
I would love to see it.
Man, that's something we need to chat about more. That's freaking awesome. So Jordan, wrapping up the interview, I want to ask you, what's next for you? If you look at the last 4 years of coaching, you kind of got your itch back for the sport of wrestling. You've been a big part of the evolution of girls wrestling. You're a big part of these kids' lives right now. What's next for Jordan Jimenez?
For me, man, it is going to be to bring a high school state championship to Rocky Mount High School. I want to see us win. Yes, sir. There we go. I'm not rocking any of my Rocky gear, but I got my Idaho national team shirt on. I love it. But I believe that in the next few years we can develop a program that is contending for a team state title. I was fortunate enough to have my first individual state champion last season on the girls' side. Haven't had one yet in the boys. We've had several place in the top 5. We've had several guys go out there and honestly be state title contenders. I'm just not quite able to get there yet. But man, my goal is to bring a state title to our high school, have more kids on my team win state titles, but ultimately just impact these kids at the highest level possible. Also, do everything in my power to increase the level of wrestling on the girls' side here as well, which we have a very high level girls team right now as far as like a national level. We had 4 All-Americans this year at the national tournament, which was amazing. But man, next year I want 8, I want 10, so those are my goals there.
Freaking love it, dude. I freaking love it. Hey, Jordan, where can we follow you at, man? Is there any social media or anything that we can follow to kind of watch your journey moving forward?
Yeah. So social media for Instagram is J_Jimenez 1227. So go follow me on there. I try and post as much as I can as far as wrestling technique, wrestling philosophy, and mindset. I need to do a little bit better, but I try and post as much as I can just to give back. But yeah, and then do you mind if I plug something real quick?
Yeah, feel free, please.
So one thing that we've been doing a lot in our club, and I've now brought to Rocky Mountain High School and our athletes is journaling. It's something I don't think a ton of people are doing yet, but with how mental this sport is, having the ability to write down your thoughts, write down your goals and ideas, and just how you're feeling is invaluable, right? And so the club I coach for, All In Wrestling Club, we came and we partnered with Ben Askren on this as well. I'm sure you know who he is if you're a UFC guy, but he's also he's the coach of hands down the best youth club program in the country. It's not even close. And so we came up with this journal called the All In Wrestlers Journal. And so it's a journal that is 90 days, has a page for every single day where you can write down things you're grateful for, your actions for that day, reflections, opportunities, your big vision, and then just journal your thoughts. Okay. So if you go to allinwrestlersjournal.com, that's where you can pick one of those up. So I just wanted to plug that because I think it's something that is very underutilized these days.
Whoa. Okay. So allinwrestlersjournal.com, checking it out right here. Now, do you have any funnels? I just got to ask you this on the thing. Did you build any funnels for this, Jordan, yet?
No, I haven't yet. However, the head coach of our club, he's a ClickFunnels guy. He was at Funnel Hacking Live this week. So I'm hoping maybe we could take that to the next level.
Yeah, dude. We just gotta. So for those who are listening, just as an FYI, like I know Jordan just from my previous job where he currently works full time and stuff. So, my previous full time work and stuff. So that's where we met. The Funnels Sphere. So ClickFunnels. If you guys want a discount, hey, I got a link in the description for y'all too. By the way, I'm still an affiliate of ClickFunnels. I'm a big proponent of the software and whatnot. But we just talk marketing and funnel building. That's why I brought that up here on here. If anybody's wondering, like, why did he even bring that up? So that's cool, man. So wrestlersjournal.com. I'm going to put that link here in the description as well. I'll also put your for those who were like, what, J_Jimenez 1227, like all the numbers. I'll just put the link here in the description with the tag as well, so you guys can follow him. And yeah, Jordan, I just want to say thanks, brother. I appreciate you joining me, and hopefully we can have more conversations in the future. Yeah, but I hope this brings a ton of like insight to the wrestling world and those who are like aspiring wrestlers and whatnot. So hopefully they'll take note just like I did. So I appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the Game Time Guru podcast. Send it to your friends, share it all over, because it was a great time being here.
I appreciate you, man. Like you said, hit that follow button, guys, because we'll be coming to you next week with another interview. Take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.